Welcome to this video where we're going to speak to you about getting started with your brand new SmartBench. We're going to cover assembly of the machine, console setup, as well as the hardware setup. And by the end of this video, you should be ready for your first project with SmartBench. Let's get started with assembly. The first section we're going to cover is the mechanical assembly of the bench. As you can see, I've taken it out of the box and removed all the packaging, and this is what it looks like laid out on the floor. The first thing we're going to do is assemble the first pair of legs onto the bench. Before we fit the first pair of legs, we need to identify which end of the Y bench is the home end. To identify the home end of the Y bench, look for the home icon sticker. We're going to fit the first pair of legs at the opposite end of the Y bench. You'll notice that on the far end, there is no sticker on the crossbeam. Now that we've identified which end of the Y bench we're going to fit the first pair of legs to, we need to prepare the legs. Start by folding them out so they're flat, and then ensure that both the cam locks are in the open position. You can identify this when the plate on the leg clamp bolt moves away from the leg. Now that the leg clamping bolts are in their open position, we're ready to fit the legs to the Y bench. To do this, hold the legs with one hand and raise one end of the Y bench with the other hand. You can just slot the leg clamping bolts into the slots in the Y bench end plate. So now we're ready to clamp the legs onto the bench. Before you clamp, you need to lift up the assembly by the leg plate, not the bench. This ensures that the feet of the legs are not on the floor when you're clamping. These clamps are set from the factory to close at a 45-degree angle to the legs. This is because while this still applies a good amount of force to clamp the legs, it makes it much easier to undo them when it comes to disassembly. It is important never to twist the handle when clamping or unclamping, as this can change the clamping position. Now that we've fitted the first pair of legs, we're ready to prepare the Y bench to fit the lower X beam. To do this, we use our second pair of legs as a trestle to support the Y bench. Lift up the end of the Y bench, take the legs and put them underneath the bench roughly halfway along the first clamping panel. The end of the Y bench is now raised, ready to receive the lower beam. Just before we fit the lower beam, it's important that you check that all 8 wheels have their tyres. Each wheel has 2 tyres, one on the top and one on the bottom. These tyres are split, which is intentional so they last longer during operation. However, this can mean that they can come loose during transit. If they have, all it takes is just a light push to seat them back on the bearings. Before inserting your lower beam, you need to identify the home sticker, as you'll need to line this up with the home sticker on the Y bench. Now we're ready to fit the lower beam to the Y bench. Once you're at the Y bench, identify the home sticker on the lower beam and the Y bench. Make sure they're on the same side. Next, support the lower beam with your leg, lift it up and offer the wheels into the channels on the Y bench. Once the first set of wheels are in the channel, you'll need to apply some pressure to the lower beam to pop the other sets of wheels in. You'll feel a light pop as they go into the channel, and this is just the preload of the wheels. Once you push the lower beam a little bit further, you'll feel the pinions engage in the racks. At this point, push the lower beam further in, up to the legs. Now we have our lower beam fitted to our Y bench, we can fix the second pair of legs to the bench. To do this, reach under and grab the legs, then lift the bench as high as you can. Same as the first pair, locate the clamping bolts under the slots in the end plate and drop the bench onto the legs. Next, lift the legs again from the leg plate, not the bench, and fix the clamps. Now that we've fitted the lower beam, you'll notice that there's a clamping bolt similar to those on the legs at either end of the beam. Before we fit the upper beam, we need to make sure that these are loosened off to allow the upper beam to load onto the skids. The next section we're going to cover is fitting the upper X beam. The same applies to this as with the lower beam. We need to line up the home sticker, which is situated on the inside of one of the channels, with the home stickers on the Y bench and the lower beam. Alternatively, you can ensure that the link cable is on the same side as the E-stop on the lower beam. Fitting of the upper beam on your own will be made easier if the lower X beam is as close to the home end as possible. To fit it, you simply slide the channels on the end plates over the clamping bolts, which are a very similar design to the legs. When you first unpack your SmartBench, you'll find the upper beam looms in this position from transit. It's important before you install the Z head to slide these out so the Z head can fit into the channels. Next, we need to plug in the upper beam link cable. This cable has a rotating cuff that locks it in place. It plugs in on the underside of the lower X beam, and to plug it in, you push it in until the pins locate. Then, while holding the bottom steady, rotate just the cuff until you hear a click. So now it's time to fit the Z head. You will need to know the location of the dust shoe elbow, as we'll be using this as a reference. It's also important to note at this point that we'll be loading it from the loom end of the upper beam, not the home end, as it is much quicker and easier to load it from this end. Before we load, it is important to check the wheels as we did on the X lower beam. So check that all tyres are present and in the correct position, and refit as needed. While we're here, note the position of the pinions, as you'll feel the resistance from these as we load the Z head onto the racks. We'll be loading our Z head so that the wheels slide into these channels and the pinions load onto these racks. When picking the Z head up, make sure that the dust shoe elbow that we previously identified is facing towards you. Pick the Z head up by the motors and the bottom plate. Crouch down so that the upper beam is at eye level to make loading slightly easier. And then position the first set of wheels into the channels. Once those are in, you should feel a slight pop as the pinions and the next set of wheels engage. The next thing we're going to do is attach the looms to the Z head. To do this, we need to be able to access this feature. So we need to pull the Z head back and remove these thumb screws. So now that we've exposed this feature, we can fit the loom. We need to put the cable into the recessed channel and locate the latch plate onto the feature on the Z head. It's important to give it a push to make sure that it's fully inserted and that the feature on the Z head plate pokes through. Now that the latch plate is on the Z head lower plate, we can install the thumb screw. It is important to make sure that the washer is still present on the thumb screw. Now that the latch plate is attached, we can plug the loom into the side of the electronics case on the Z head. So firmly push in the plug and then attach with the thumb screw. We're now going to repeat this process with the loom on the opposite side of the Z head. At this point, we need to make sure that our latch plates are securely constrained with the thumb screws and that our electrical connections are securely in place. Now, as a check to make sure your looms are in the right place, you can push your Z head with a bit of resistance into the middle of your X upper beam. Next, we need to ensure that the cable connection into the back of the spindle is still good. You can do this by trying to turn the threaded collar on the cable. Just before we insert the spindle, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the airflow. The spindle motor has 2 ports, one on each side, which air come out of in a very specific direction. So it's worth getting the orientation in the Z head right so this air can escape. It is important to note before we load the spindle motor that these surfaces on the collar of the spindle, as well as the clamping collar in the Z head, are clean and free from any dust. Now we're going to load the spindle motor into the Z head. Before we tighten the clamping bolt, rotate the spindle anti-clockwise slightly so that the switch is in line with the aluminium pillar on the Z head. This maximises the airflow and allows for spindle cooling. Now the spindle motor is in the correct orientation in the Z head, we can take our 6mm hex driver and tighten the clamping bolt. To do this, check that the spindle can freely rotate in the clamp. Tighten the clamping bolt until the spindle can no longer rotate. Then apply no more than 1/8 of a turn. Do not exceed this tightening, since it will crush the bearings in the spindle and reduce its life. Next, we can install the dust shoe plug. We need to make sure that we install this in the front of the Z head, and we locate the black tabs into the gaps between the layers of clear acrylic. Make sure that it is the black tabs engaging in the gaps and not the clear plastic. Next, we can fit the Z Pro plate. This fits in the slot in the side of the Z head electronics housing. And then the connector plugs in the bottom of the Z head. Next, we're going to install the console. These 2 tabs fit into these 2 locating holes in the upper beam end plate. So they simply slide in, and once you're sure that they're fully home, you can let the console drop and they will lock into place. You need to make sure that the tabs are fully home so that they can't wobble out of the end plate. When the console is correctly inserted, it's fine in operation, but if you did want the extra peace of mind, we do include a leash, which you can install if you choose. This means that if the console does get knocked and falls out of the X upper beam, it won't hit the floor. To install this leash, pass it through the hole in the upper beam end plate, then pass the carabiner through the loop on the other end. Next, clip the carabiner through one of the holes on the front console plate. Then you can install your console as normal. Now, if it does fall out, the leash will stop it from hitting the floor. Now we're going to plug the console cable into the elbow on the X upper beam. To do this, make sure that the ridge on the cable end lines up with the slot in the receiving socket. Another way to identify the correct orientation is that the latch will be facing the right-hand side of the upper beam. Effective extraction is essential for maintaining reliability, cutter life, and finished part accuracy. Incorrectly setting up your extraction can also cause damage to your machine, so it is worth getting this part right. Your extractor can either be powered from SmartBench with the supplied extraction cable or from a separate power outlet. Powering the extractor from SmartBench can be useful, as this means that SmartBench can switch the extractor on and off automatically. However, depending on the power of your extractor, the power supply cable to SmartBench, shown here, might not be able to carry the extra load of your extractor. If this is the case, you will need to power your extractor from a separate power outlet, and it will need to be switched manually. So how do you know whether you can power your extractor from a SmartBench? In my case, I can find the power of my extractor on the electrical specification label. This extractor is rated at 1400 watts. Next, I need to find out what SmartBench I'm running. I can find this out in the documentation or by looking at the lower beam. A V1.2 or older will have 2 power sockets on the lower beam. A V1.3 will have 3. For a V1.2 or older, you need to refer to our video on how to calculate SmartBench's capacity based on your region. For a V1.3, SmartBench's extraction power capacity is 1.5 kilowatts. If your extractor is rated over SmartBench's extraction power capacity, you must not run it through SmartBench. You need to power it separately. In my case, my extractor is within SmartBench's extraction power capacity, so I can power it through SmartBench to benefit from auto switching. Before we do any electrical connections, we must ensure that SmartBench is turned off. To do this, press on the e-stop until you hear a click and the green band is no longer visible. We are now going to connect our 6 amp extractor to the SmartBench with the supplied extension cable. This plugs into the underside of the X lower beam in the socket closest to the extraction outlet. The extractor then plugs into the opposite end of the extension cable. Lastly, the extractor cable must be strain relieved in the clips on the home side of the lower X beam. Your extractor needs to have a minimum flow rate of 70 litres per second or more, depending on your application. It's important to be aware that if you're using an extractor that uses a bag, you will suffer a performance loss as the bag fills. For this reason, it's important to empty the bag before every job. So let's talk a bit about airflow. It is important to use a connecting airflow pipe that is as short as possible. It only needs to be long enough to allow free movement of the X upper beam up the entire length of the Y bench. So in SmartBench's case, if the extractor is positioned in the middle of the bench, this would be 4 foot or 1.25 meters. An excessively long pipe will decrease your extraction performance in 2 ways. It will decrease suction at the dust shoe and will greatly increase the build-up of static electricity. The extractor pipe connects to the cuff under the X lower beam. Now this cuff is flexible and will accept most pipe nozzles. However, depending on the model of your extractor, you may need to secure this connection with some tape, for example. Finally, we need to push the extractor under the bench, out of the way, so that the cables and hose won't catch when the beams move along the Y bench. To complete the connection, we need to take the SmartBench hose out of the lower beam, insert it into the elbow on the back side of the Z head, and rotate clockwise slightly to lock the pin in place. Next, we need to plug in the SmartBench input cable and a second power supply cable if you're running the extractor from SmartBench. Make sure the plugs are pushed firmly in all the way to avoid any weak connections which could damage the socket. And then strain relieve your cables so they don't get pulled out during operation. Next, we need to make sure the mains power cable is plugged in a place where there's enough reach for the beams to move the entire length of the Y bench. Now we're going to talk about powering on SmartBench. Before we do power on SmartBench, we need to ensure that all the electrical connections between all the sub-assemblies are secure. This includes connections between the console, upper beam, lower beam, Z head, and spindle. Once we're happy that all the connections are secure, we can power on SmartBench. To do this, just twist the e-stop clockwise and it will spring out. A few seconds after you've powered on, you'll see the blue Yeti Tool loading screen on the console. This can take up to a minute for the software to fully boot. You'll notice that the dust shoe lights will also illuminate. The first time you boot your SmartBench console, you'll be asked to activate your warranty. The console will give you a link to the website and a serial number, and you can use this serial number to get an activation code from the website. This activation code will allow you to unlock SmartBench. Let's do this now. You can access the website using the QR code, which will give you a link on your phone, or by searching for the website on your desktop computer. We're going to hit next, which will give us our serial number. We can type this serial number into the website, which will give us our activation code. Fill out your details and enter only the numbers from your serial number shown on your console screen into the box that says serial number. Make sure to double check that you have entered the correct number, as this will be used to provide you with your unique activation code. Select your place of purchase and press activate. Your activation code will appear on the next screen. Now I've got my activation code, I can enter it into the SmartBench console. Now we've entered the code, all we have to do is press this button to get started. So before we can use SmartBench, when we first boot it up, the console will bring up the safety screen. Once you've read through all the warnings and you're happy with them, you can proceed to the next screen. Once you've cleared the safety screen, SmartBench will ask to home. It will bring up two options of manual and auto squaring. For now, we're just going to choose auto squaring. If you wish to learn about the difference between the two, please visit our Knowledgebase website. Once we've selected the auto squaring option, the screen will give us a reminder to make sure that SmartBench is clear and to remove the extraction hose. So let's do that now. As you can see, our bench is already clear of anything on the working surface, so we just need to disconnect the hose. Once we've done that, we can push the home button. SmartBench will begin to home and display a yellow light on the dust shoe. At this point, SmartBench will start the auto squaring procedure. During the auto squaring procedure, SmartBench will make a stalling noise. This is normal. This is how it squares against the legs. It will then rehome one final time to make up for the position lost during squaring. Once the homing procedure is complete, a green light will illuminate on the dust shoe. So now that we've been through all the mandatory procedures, we're going to move on to setting up your SmartBench console. The first thing we're going to discuss is connecting your console to Wi-Fi. This is optional, however, it is recommended to make file transfer and software updates far easier. The first step is to navigate to the Wi-Fi setup. To do this, go to your console lobby, which is the first thing that will come up after homing, and move along to the Wi-Fi app. So once you're in the Wi-Fi app, you need to select your network from the drop-down menu, enter your password here, and select your country code here. Once you're happy that all the credentials are correct, you can press connect. If you have any trouble connecting, there's some useful hints in the dialog box here. We've just connected to a Wi-Fi network here, but you also have the option of using a mobile hotspot. If you're using an Android device, it will automatically detect it in the network name drop-down. However, if you're using an Apple iPhone, there's a few more steps involved, which you can learn about on our knowledge base. Now that we're connected to our Wi-Fi or hotspot, we can easily get the latest version of the software. To do this, navigate to the next screen along in the lobby and click on the Update app. If you're connected to Wi-Fi, you simply need to press Update. If not, you can use a USB stick and you'll have to download the version of the software from our website. Now we've completed the console setup, we can move on to the machine setup. There's two procedures we need to carry out here. Firstly, access calibration. While we do carry out this procedure in the factory before the machine leaves, we don't know how well it's been handled in transit. So it is recommended to do this as soon as you receive your machine. If you want to learn about how to calibrate your machine yourself, please see our knowledge base on our website. There'll be a link in the video description below. Secondly, laser offset calibration. Depending on the model of the machine you chose, it may have a laser datum fitted. If it does, you'll need to calibrate the offset from the crosshair to the tool. This can be done easily on your SmartBench console. If you want to learn more in depth about how to do this, again, please visit our knowledge base on our website. There'll be a link in the video description below. Next, we're going to talk about powering off your SmartBench. Firstly, you need to power off the console. To do this, use the exit button to go back to the console lobby screen. The shutdown button is located in the center at the bottom. Press this button and then press Shut Down Now. Once you've shut down your console, the screen will go blank. Wait 20 to 30 seconds, and then once that time has elapsed, you can simply press the power button on the lower beam. SmartBench is now ready to use. For your next steps, look into downloading our SmartTransfer app to make your workflow easier with SmartBench, and check out our first project tutorial and our knowledge base on our website, which has loads of material for you to learn more about CNC with SmartBench in mind. Thanks a lot, we'll see you in the next video.